The morning sun was just beginning to warm the glass windows of San Francisco International Airport as Marcus Chen walked through the spacious terminal, pulling his expensive but understated black carry-on suitcase. At 45 years old, Marcus had built his tech company, Data Flow Solutions, from nothing into a $12 billion enterprise, but you wouldn't know it by looking at him. Today, he wore comfortable dark blue jeans, a soft gray cashmere sweater, and his favorite pair of black sneakers. His short black hair was neatly trimmed, and his warm brown eyes carried the tired look of someone who had spent the previous night finishing important work. Like many successful people in Silicon Valley, Marcus believed in dressing for comfort rather than showing off his wealth. As he walked toward Gate A7 for his flight to New York, Marcus checked his phone one last time. There were 20 unread emails and several messages from his executive team about their upcoming board meeting. He had an important presentation to give the next morning, which was why he had booked a first-class ticket. He needed to arrive fresh and well-rested. "Good morning. Welcome to United Airlines," the gate agent said with a smile, scanning his boarding pass. Her name tag read Sarah, and she treated him with the same professional courtesy she showed to every passenger. Marcus appreciated these small moments of normal interaction. Walking down the jet bridge, Marcus thought about his journey. 20 years ago, he had started his company in a small garage with just 2 computers and a dream. Now, Dataflow Solutions employed over 5,000 people and had offices in 12 countries. The latest Forbes magazine had estimated his personal worth at $3.2 billion, but Marcus never let these numbers change who he was at heart. A hardworking person who believed in treating everyone with respect. As he approached the airplane's entrance, Marcus saw 2 flight attendants greeting passengers. The younger one, a man named Tom according to his name tag, smiled warmly. The other flight attendant, a middle-aged woman with blonde hair pulled back in a tight bun, was Karen Walsh. She was busy arranging something in the galley and barely looked up as passengers passed by. Marcus made his way to seat 2A, his favorite spot in first class. He had flown enough to know that this seat offered the perfect balance of privacy and service. As he lifted his carry-on bag to place it in the overhead compartment, he noticed Karen Walsh watching him with a puzzled expression. The first-class cabin was elegant, with 12 spacious leather seats arranged in 3 rows. Most of the other passengers were already settled in, a mix of business people in suits and a couple of well-dressed tourists. Marcus took out his laptop and a book before sitting down, planning to review his presentation one last time before trying to get some rest. That's when he heard footsteps approaching. Karen Walsh stood next to his seat, her lips pressed into a thin line. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice carrying a tone that Marcus had heard too many times before. "I believe you might be in the wrong section. Could I see your boarding pass?" Marcus felt a familiar weight in his stomach. He had experienced this type of situation before, despite his success and status. Without saying a word, he reached into his pocket and pulled out his boarding pass, handing it to her with a calm smile. Karen studied the boarding pass with exaggerated care, turning it over as if searching for signs of forgery. A few nearby passengers began to take notice of the interaction. Marcus could see their reactions ranging from embarrassment to disapproval, not at him, but at Karen's behavior. "Did you perhaps get an upgrade?" Karen asked, still holding his boarding pass. Her tone suggested she couldn't believe he had actually paid for a first-class ticket. "No," Marcus replied simply, maintaining his professional demeanor. "I booked this seat directly." He had learned long ago that staying calm in these situations was the best approach, though it shouldn't have been necessary in the first place. Other passengers began settling into their seats around them, some openly watching the interaction. A young woman in 2C had already taken out her phone, discreetly pointing it in their direction. Marcus noticed this but kept his attention on Karen, who was still standing over him with his boarding pass in her hand. The morning sun streamed through the airplane windows, casting long shadows across the first-class cabin. What should have been the routine start of a business trip was about to become something much more significant, though Marcus didn't know it yet. He sat quietly, waiting for Karen's next move, his hands folded calmly in his lap. Karen Walsh stood over Marcus, still holding his boarding pass with a look of suspicion on her face. The first-class cabin had grown oddly quiet, with other passengers pretending to read their magazines or check their phones while actually watching the scene unfold. "I need to check something with my supervisor," Karen announced, her voice louder than necessary. She walked away with Marcus's boarding pass, her heels clicking against the airplane floor. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself that he had dealt with similar situations before. Tom, the younger flight attendant, watched the scene with clear discomfort from the galley. He seemed to want to say something but held back as Karen returned with Sarah Miller, the lead flight attendant. Sarah was a woman in her 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that now looked troubled. "Sir," Sarah began, speaking in a softer voice than Karen had used, "there seems to be some confusion about your seating arrangement." She held Marcus's boarding pass in her hand, though both she and Karen knew perfectly well that everything on it was correct. Marcus smiled politely and reached for his phone. "I'm happy to show you my confirmation email as well," he said, opening his United Airlines app. "I've also been a platinum member with United for the past 8 years. His voice remained steady and professional, the same voice he used when dealing with difficult board meetings. A businessman across the aisle, who had been watching the situation, suddenly spoke up. "This is ridiculous," he said, shaking his head. "I've seen this gentleman at several tech conferences. He's Marcus Chen, the CEO of Dataflow Solutions." Karen's face flushed red, but instead of backing down, she doubled down on her position. "We've received complaints from other first-class passengers about this seating arrangement," she claimed, though no one had made any such complaints. The young woman in 2C, who had been recording the interaction, couldn't stay quiet any longer. "That's absolutely false," she said firmly. "No one has complained. I've been sitting here the whole time." More passengers began to speak up, creating a low murmur of disapproval. Tom, the younger flight attendant, finally stepped forward. "Karen," he said quietly, "his boarding pass is completely valid. There's no issue here." But Karen wasn't finished. She turned to Sarah and spoke in a stage whisper that everyone could hear. "I'm just trying to ensure the comfort of all our first-class passengers. Maybe we should move him to economy, where there might be a more suitable arrangement." Marcus felt his chest tighten at these words, but his face remained calm. Years of dealing with prejudice had taught him how to handle such situations with dignity. He looked directly at Sarah, the lead flight attendant, and spoke clearly. "Is there a specific reason why my valid first-class ticket and platinum membership are being questioned?" Sarah looked increasingly uncomfortable. Other passengers had now taken out their phones, recording the incident. An older woman in the third row called out, "This is shameful. You should be ashamed of yourselves." The situation had drawn the attention of passengers in economy class, who were trying to see what was happening as they boarded. The plane should have been preparing for departure, but instead, a scene was unfolding that would soon make headlines across the country. Karen, seemingly oblivious to the mounting tension, turned to Sarah. "If you won't move voluntarily, we might have to delay the flight. It's a security concern." She emphasized the last two words, though there was clearly no security issue at all. Marcus looked around the cabin, noting the mix of angry and sympathetic faces watching the scene. He saw Tom shaking his head in disapproval at his colleague's behavior. He noticed the young woman still recording everything on her phone. He observed Sarah's growing realization that this situation was spiraling out of control. In that moment, Marcus made a decision. As a business leader, he knew that sometimes the strongest response wasn't the most obvious one. He reached for his laptop bag and stood up slowly, his movement causing Karen to step back quickly, as if she had been afraid he would do something unpredictable. "I'd like to speak with the gate agent," Marcus said calmly, his voice carrying authority without anger. "And I'll need all of your names for my report to United Airlines corporate office." He paused, looking each flight attendant in the eye. "This isn't over, but I won't be the reason this flight is delayed." Marcus walked calmly toward the front of the plane, his laptop bag held firmly in one hand. As he moved, other passengers began to voice their opinions more loudly. The quiet tension of the previous moments had broken into open protest. "This is discrimination," called out the businessman who had recognized Marcus earlier. He stood up from his seat, pulling out his own phone to record what was happening. "I'm going to post this on LinkedIn right now. Everyone needs to see how United Airlines treats their premium passengers." Karen Walsh hurried after Marcus, her face now red with a mix of embarrassment and stubbornness. "Sir, you're disrupting the flight," she said, trying to turn the situation around. "If you continue to cause a scene, we'll have to call security." Several passengers gasped at her words. The young woman who had been recording everything jumped up from her seat. "The only person causing a scene is you," she shouted. Her name was Jennifer Torres, as Marcus would later learn, and she was a popular social media influencer with millions of followers. Sarah Miller, the lead flight attendant, finally seemed to realize the gravity of the situation. She stepped between Karen and Marcus, her face pale with worry. "Mr. Chen, please, let's talk about this calmly. Perhaps we can find a solution that works for everyone." Marcus turned to face her, his voice steady but firm. "A solution? I bought a first-class ticket. I'm a platinum member. I run a billion-dollar company. The only solution needed here is for your staff to treat all passengers with respect, regardless of how they look." Tom, the younger flight attendant, had been watching everything with growing concern. He stepped forward and spoke directly to Sarah. "This is wrong," he said firmly. "We're going to be in serious trouble over this, and we should be." By now, the economy passengers who were still boarding had stopped in the aisle, creating a backup in the jet bridge. Many had their phones out, recording the scene. The story was already spreading across social media platforms, with hashtags like hashtag United Airlines and hashtag Marcushen starting to trend. Karen, instead of backing down, made one final, disastrous decision. She walked to the plane's phone and called the gate. "This is Flight 2847. We need security at the gate. We have an uncooperative passenger who needs to be removed." The reaction from the other passengers was immediate and intense. Several people stood up, voicing their objections. A retired teacher in the second row announced she would be writing to her congressperson about this incident. 2 business executives said they would cancel their United corporate accounts. Marcus watched all of this with a calm that came from years of handling difficult situations. He took out his phone and made a quick call. "James? Yes, it's Marcus. I need you to contact United's corporate office immediately. Yes, I'm about to be removed from their flight for, well, I think we all know why." James was Marcus's head of legal affairs, and within minutes, calls would be flying between his office and United's headquarters. But for now, Marcus had to deal with the immediate situation. 2 security officers arrived at the gate, looking confused when they saw the scene. One of them, Officer Rodriguez, immediately recognized Marcus from a tech conference where he had been a keynote speaker. "Mr. Chen?" Officer Rodriguez said, surprised. "What seems to be the problem here?" Before Karen could speak, Jennifer Torres stepped forward with her phone. "I have the whole thing recorded," she said. "This flight attendant has been harassing Mr. Chen since he boarded, questioning his first-class ticket and trying to force him to move to economy for no valid reason." The security officers exchanged glances. They had dealt with unruly passengers before, but this was clearly different. Officer Rodriguez turned to Sarah. "Ma'am, is there any actual security concern here?" Sarah looked at Karen, then at Marcus, then at all the recording phones pointed in their direction. She knew this situation had gone far beyond a simple seating dispute. This was now a potential PR disaster for United Airlines, and it was about to get much worse. Marcus stood quietly, watching it all unfold. He had already decided what his next steps would be. This incident would not be swept under the rug or handled with a simple apology. He was going to use this moment to create real change, not just for himself, but for everyone who had ever faced similar treatment. Officer Rodriguez pulled out his notebook and started taking detailed notes about the situation. The entire first-class cabin had become a scene of chaos, with passengers standing up and sharing their video recordings with each other. Some were already posting the incident on various social media platforms, causing the story to spread like wildfire across the internet. A tall man in a business suit approached Marcus and handed him a business card. "I'm Richard Palmer, an attorney with Brooks and Palmer Law. What's happening here is completely unacceptable. If you need a witness statement, I'd be happy to provide one." Marcus accepted the card with a polite nod. The support from fellow passengers was touching, but he had already formed a clear plan in his mind. This situation needed to become more than just another viral video of discrimination. It needed to lead to real change. Sarah Miller, the lead flight attendant, was now on the phone with her supervisors, her face growing increasingly pale as she listened to their instructions. Karen Walsh stood nearby, her earlier confidence replaced by nervous fidgeting as she watched more and more phones recording her actions. "The flight is now delayed by 20 minutes. Tom announced over the intercom, his voice carrying a note of frustration. Several passengers in economy class groaned, but many of them had seen what happened and understood the reason for the delay. Jennifer Torres, the social media influencer, approached Marcus with her phone. "Mr. Chen, I have the entire incident recorded from the moment she first questioned your ticket. Would you like me to send it to you? It might be useful for your legal team." Marcus smiled warmly at her. "Yes, thank you. That would be very helpful." He handed her his business card, watching as Karen's face grew even more worried at this exchange. Officer Rodriguez finished his initial report and turned to Marcus. "Mr. Chen, technically, the airline has the right to remove any passenger, but in this case, I'm seeing no valid reason for removal. This appears to be a clear case of discriminatory behavior." The gate agent, who had finally been called to the scene, looked horrified as she reviewed the situation. Her name tag read Lisa Chen, no relation to Marcus, and she had worked for United for 15 years. "Mr. Chen, on behalf of United Airlines, I want to express our deepest apologies. This is not how we treat our passengers, especially not our platinum members." But Marcus knew that apologies weren't enough. He stood up straighter and addressed everyone present. "I appreciate the support from all of you," he said, his voice clear and steady. "But rather than continue this disruption, I will voluntarily leave this flight." Protests erupted from the other passengers. "You shouldn't have to leave," someone shouted. "Make her leave instead," called another voice from the back. Marcus raised his hand gently for silence. Sometimes, the strongest response isn't to fight, but to choose how you'll use a bad situation for good. I have another way to handle this. He turned to Officer Rodriguez. "I'd like a copy of your incident report, please." Then he looked at Karen Walsh directly. "And I want you to remember this moment, because what happens next will affect not just you, but every flight attendant in this airline." Sarah Miller stepped forward, probably to offer another apology, but Marcus simply held up his hand. "Please ensure all these passengers get my business card. They're witnesses to what happened here, and my legal team will need their statements." As Marcus gathered his belongings and prepared to leave the plane, the young businessman who had recognized him earlier stood up. "Mr. Chen, I'm canceling my company's corporate account with United today. This is unacceptable." Several other business travelers nodded in agreement. Marcus knew that by the end of the day, this incident would cost United Airlines millions in canceled corporate contracts, but his plan went far beyond just hitting their bottom line. Walking down the aisle toward the exit, Marcus heard passengers clapping, not for his departure, but for his dignity in handling the situation. He nodded politely to them, already composing in his mind the email he would send to his team about what would happen next. As he reached the gate area, Marcus took out his phone and made another call. "Linda?" "Yes, cancel my meetings in New York. We have something more important to handle. It's time to use our foundation's resources to create some real change in the airline industry." By the time Marcus reached his office building in downtown San Francisco, the incident had exploded across social media. His phone hadn't stopped buzzing with notifications, and hashtag #UnitedDiscrimination was trending #1 on Twitter. Jennifer Torres's video had already gained over 2 million views in just 3 hours. Marcus sat in his large corner office, surrounded by his emergency response team. James Wan, his head of legal affairs, was reviewing the footage from multiple passengers. Linda Chen, his chief of staff, again, no relation, was coordinating with their PR team. And Michael Thompson, the director of the Chen Foundation, was already drafting proposals. "The airline's CEO has been trying to reach you for the past hour," Linda reported, looking up from her tablet. "And we've received interview requests from CNN, Fox News, and every major network." Marcus nodded, but his attention was focused on something else. His team had discovered that Karen Walsh had a history of similar incidents. Over the past 5 years, 7 formal complaints had been filed against her for discriminatory behavior, but they had all been quietly handled with simple apologies. "This is bigger than just one flight attendant," Marcus said, standing up to look out his office window at the San Francisco skyline. "The problem is with the system that kept her employed despite multiple complaints." James adjusted his glasses and looked up from his laptop. "We found something interesting. United's current diversity training program is just a 2-hour online course. Flight attendants can complete it without any real engagement or understanding. The door opened, and Sarah Martinez, Marcus's head of research, rushed in with more findings. "You won't believe this," she said, placing a folder on his desk. "We've collected data from the past 3 years. There have been over 2,000 reported incidents of discrimination across all major airlines, but less than 1% resulted in any meaningful action." Marcus turned from the window, a determined look in his eyes. "Then that's where we start." He walked to his whiteboard and began writing. His team watched, knowing that this was how many of his most successful projects had begun. "The Chen Foundation will develop a comprehensive anti-bias training program," he announced. "Not just videos and quizzes, but real, interactive sessions with professional facilitators. We'll bring in experts in psychology, sociology, and cultural awareness." Linda was already taking notes on her tablet. "We should include real-world scenarios and require actual demonstration of understanding, not just clicking through slides." "Exactly," Marcus agreed. "And we'll offer it to United Airlines first, free of charge." His team looked surprised at this last part. Michael Thompson raised an eyebrow. "Free, even with all the negative publicity they're facing." Marcus smiled. "This isn't about revenge. It's about creating real change. If United implements this program successfully, other airlines will follow. That's how we create industry-wide impact." Just then, Linda's phone buzzed. "United's CEO is here in the building," she announced. "He flew in personally to handle this situation." "Perfect timing," Marcus said. He turned to his team. "James, get me the numbers on discrimination complaints. Sarah, prepare the training program outline. Michael, draft a proposal for implementing this across their entire organization." As his team rushed to prepare the materials, Marcus sat down at his desk and opened his laptop. He began typing an email to all Data Flow Solutions employees, explaining why he wouldn't be in New York for the board meeting, but also sharing a more important message about standing up for change. The Chen Foundation had always focused on technology education, but today it would take on a new mission. Marcus knew that real change required more than just social media outrage or legal threats. It required systematic, thoughtful action. His phone buzzed again, another media request, this time from Time magazine. They wanted to do a cover story not just about the incident, but about his response to it. Marcus declined for now, knowing that actions would speak louder than interviews. "United's CEO is heading up in the elevator," Linda announced. "Should I tell him to wait?" Marcus shook his head. "No, show him in as soon as he arrives." He looked at his team gathered around the conference table in his office. "Let's show him how we can turn this incident into an opportunity for real change." His team nodded, understanding that they were about to be part of something much bigger than a viral video or a news cycle. They were about to help transform how an entire industry handled diversity and inclusion. Robert Williams, the CEO of United Airlines, walked into Marcus's office looking tense and tired. He had clearly rushed to San Francisco as soon as he saw the viral videos, which had now reached over 10 million views across different platforms. His usual confident demeanor was replaced by genuine concern. "Mr. Chen," Robert began, extending his hand. "I want to personally apologize for the inexcusable treatment you received on our flight today. We're prepared to offer." Marcus raised his hand politely to stop him. "Before we discuss any offers, I'd like to show you something." He pressed a button on his desk, and a large screen descended from the ceiling. Sarah Martinez stepped forward with her presentation ready. "In the past 3 hours," Sarah began, "your airline has lost approximately $28 million in canceled corporate contracts." She clicked to the next slide. "Your stock price has dropped 12%. But that's not the most important data we found." Robert Williams sat down heavily in one of the office chairs, his face growing more concerned with each number. But Marcus wasn't interested in punishing United Airlines. He had a different plan in mind. "Now," Marcus said, standing up and walking to the screen, "I want to show you something more important." He nodded to Michael Thompson, who brought up the new presentation they had prepared. On the screen appeared detailed plans for a comprehensive training program called Aviation Equality Initiative. The program included virtual reality simulations, in-person workshops, and real-world scenario training. It was far more extensive than anything currently being used in the airline industry. "This," Marcus explained, "is what the Chen Foundation wants to offer United Airlines." Not as a punishment, but as a partnership. Robert looked confused. A partnership? Yes, Marcus continued. We'll provide this entire program to United Airlines at no cost. We'll also cover the implementation expenses for the first year. All we ask is that you make it mandatory for every employee, from gate agents to executives. Linda stepped forward with contracts already prepared. We've outlined a 3-year plan. The first airline to successfully implement this program will be seen as an industry leader in addressing discrimination. Robert Williams studied the documents, his expression changing from worry to interest. This is comprehensive. But why would you help us after what happened? Marcus smiled. Because this isn't about revenge. It's about creating lasting change. He walked to his window, looking out at the city below. Today's incident wasn't just about one flight attendant or one airline. It's about a system that needs updating. James Wong, the legal head, spoke up. We've also prepared a joint press release. Instead of focusing on the incident, it announces our partnership to create industry-leading standards for inclusive customer service. Robert looked up from the documents. And Karen Walsh, the flight attendant. She needs to complete the full training program, Marcus said firmly. But more importantly, she needs to be part of the solution. We want her to share her experience and help others understand why these changes are necessary. The United CEO sat quietly for a moment, then stood up and extended his hand again. Mr. Chen, I came here expecting to handle a PR crisis. Instead, you're offering us an opportunity to lead real change in our industry. Marcus shook his hand. That's exactly what we're offering. The question is, are you ready to make it happen? When can we start? Robert asked. Linda stepped forward with her tablet. We can announce the partnership today. The first training modules will be ready within 2 weeks. We've already contacted top experts in diversity and inclusion to help lead the programs. As they discussed the details, Marcus's phone buzzed with a message. It was from Jennifer Torres, the influencer who had recorded the original video. Mr. Chen, your response to this situation is inspiring. Would you be interested in doing a documentary about creating change in corporate America? Marcus showed the message to his team. See, this is how we turn a negative incident into positive change. Not through anger or revenge, but through action and education. The meeting continued for several hours as they worked out the details of the partnership. By the end of the day, United Airlines would announce the most comprehensive anti-bias training program in aviation history, and Marcus Chen would be celebrated not for his wealth, but for his wisdom in handling discrimination with dignity and purpose. As the sun set over San Francisco, Marcus knew that this day, which had started with discrimination, would end with the beginning of real change. Sometimes, he thought, the best revenge isn't revenge at all. It's making sure the same thing never happens to anyone else again. 2 months after the incident, Marcus Chen stood in United Airlines' main training center in Chicago, watching as the first group of flight attendants experienced the new training program. The large room was filled with various training stations, including virtual reality headsets and role-playing areas. Karen Walsh was among the first group of trainees. She sat in the front row, looking very different from the proud and prejudiced flight attendant who had confronted Marcus that day. The viral video of her actions had received over 50 million views, and she had faced intense public criticism. Today, Marcus addressed the group. You're not here to be punished or shamed. You're here to be part of something revolutionary in the airline industry. You walked around the room, making eye contact with each person. This program isn't just about avoiding discrimination. It's about understanding each other better. The first exercise involved virtual reality scenarios where flight attendants experienced what it felt like to be discriminated against. Many participants removed their VR headsets with tears in their eyes, finally understanding how their actions could affect others. Tom, the young flight attendant who had tried to help Marcus during the incident, was now helping to lead some of the training sessions. His stance against discrimination had earned him a promotion to become one of the program's first certified trainers. The most powerful moment, Tom explained to a news reporter who was covering the training, is when we show real stories of passengers who have faced discrimination. It's not just statistics, it's real people with real feelings. During the lunch break, Karen Walsh approached Marcus with trembling hands. Mr. Chen, she said quietly, I need to apologize. Not just for what I did, but for not understanding why it was wrong for so many years. Marcus listened as Karen explained how the training had opened her eyes. She had never realized how her concerns about passenger comfort were actually hiding deep-seated prejudices she hadn't even recognized in herself. "Would you be willing," Marcus asked her, "to share your story with other airlines? Sometimes the best teacher is someone who has learned from their mistakes." Karen nodded, wiping tears from her eyes. "Yes, I want to help make sure no one else makes the same mistakes I did." Meanwhile, in the corner of the room, Linda was showing Robert Williams, United's CEO, the latest numbers on their screens. Since announcing the training program, United's public approval ratings had increased by 40%. Corporate clients who had canceled their contracts were now returning, impressed by the airline's commitment to change. "The other airlines are calling," Robert told Marcus. "They want to know if they can implement your program too. American Airlines, Delta, Southwest, they'd all want to be part of this." Marcus smiled. This was exactly what he had hoped for, industry-wide change. The Chen Foundation will help any airline that's serious about implementing the full program. No shortcuts, no simplified versions. Sarah Martinez, who had been collecting data on the program's impact, rushed over with her tablet. "The results from the first month are amazing," she announced. "Customer complaints about discriminatory behavior have dropped by 78% just from the first group of trained staff." Jennifer Torres, the influencer who had recorded the original video, was now making a documentary about the transformation. Her cameras captured flight attendants sharing their experiences and passengers noticing the difference in how they were treated. "The most impressive thing," Jennifer told her millions of followers in a live stream, "is how Mr. Chen turned a horrible experience into an opportunity to create real change. He could have sued, he could have demanded people be fired, but instead, he chose to educate." By the end of that day, Marcus watched as the first class of 50 flight attendants graduated from the comprehensive training program. Each one had gone through intense self-reflection, learned about different cultures, and practiced handling challenging situations with empathy and understanding. "Remember," Marcus said in his closing speech, "true change doesn't happen overnight, and it doesn't happen through punishment. It happens when people open their hearts and minds to understand each other better." As the graduates received their certificates, there wasn't a dry eye in the room. Even the most skeptical participants had been transformed by the experience. What had started as a response to discrimination had become a movement for change in the entire airline industry. Karen Walsh, standing with her certificate in hand, turned to the group and said something that would later be quoted in many news articles. "Sometimes it takes being completely wrong to learn how to do things completely right." 1 year after the incident that changed the airline industry, Marcus Chen stood on stage at the National Aviation Conference in Dallas, Texas. The huge conference hall was packed with representatives from airlines around the world, all eager to hear about the remarkable transformation that had taken place. "Ladies and gentlemen," Marcus began, looking out at the sea of faces, "exactly 1 year ago, I was asked to leave a flight because of how I looked. Today, I'm here to share how that moment led to the biggest change in airline customer service history." In the front row sat Karen Walsh, now serving as the program's lead speaker. She had traveled to over 30 cities, sharing her story of transformation. Her honest talks about recognizing and overcoming her own prejudices had touched thousands of airline employees. "The numbers tell an amazing story," Marcus continued, as slides appeared on the giant screen behind him. "In the past year, customer satisfaction across all participating airlines has increased by 65%. Discrimination complaints have dropped by 89%. But the real success isn't in these numbers, it's in the human stories." He clicked to the next slide, showing a collection of social media posts. They were all from passengers sharing positive experiences about how different air travel felt now. One post showed an elderly Muslim woman being helped with her bags by a smiling flight attendant. Another showed a flight crew celebrating a passenger's birthday with a small cake, regardless of their background. Tom, the young flight attendant who had stood up against discrimination that day, was now the national director of the Aviation Equality Initiative. He stepped up to the podium to share his part of the story. "When I saw wrong being done that day," Tom said, "I knew I had to speak up. What I didn't know was that it would lead to my dream job, helping create a more inclusive airline industry." Jennifer Torres's documentary about the transformation had just won a major award at the Sundance Film Festival. Clips from her film played on the screen, showing the journey from that tense moment on the plane to the industry-wide change it sparked. The most beautiful part, Jennifer said in a video message to the conference, is how this story didn't end with anger or lawsuits. It ended with understanding and growth. Robert Williams, United CEO, took the stage next. His airline had become the model for others to follow. Our stock price is at an all-time high, he announced. But more importantly, our employees are proud to come to work. They know they're part of something special. The Chen Foundation's training program had now been adopted by 27 airlines across the world. It had been translated into 12 languages, and over 100,000 airline employees had completed the full training. Sarah Martinez presented the latest research findings. We're seeing changes that go beyond just reducing discrimination, she explained. Employee satisfaction is up, customer loyalty has increased, and we're even seeing faster response times to passenger needs. In the audience, many of the passengers from that original flight sat as special guests. The businessman who had first recognized Marcus, the retired teacher who had promised to write to her congressperson, and others who had stood up against discrimination that day. Linda Chen walked onto the stage with a surprise announcement. The Chen Foundation is now expanding this program beyond airlines, she revealed. Hotels, restaurants, and retail chains have all asked to adapt our training for their industries. As the conference came to a close, Marcus shared one final story. Last week, I took a United Airlines flight, he said with a smile. As I walked onto the plane, every single crew member greeted me with genuine warmth. Not because I'm Marcus Chen, but because that's how they now treat every passenger. Karen Walsh stood up and joined Marcus on stage. Together, they unveiled the new industry-wide commitment. Every passenger, every time, a promise to treat all travelers with equal respect and dignity. The audience rose in a standing ovation. Among them were airline executives from around the world, all holding signed commitments to implement the full training program in their companies. As Marcus looked out at the crowd, he remembered that morning 1 year ago when he had calmly walked off the plane. He had turned a moment of discrimination into a movement for change. His revenge hadn't been about punishment. It had been about transformation. Remember, Marcus concluded, real change doesn't come from getting even. It comes from making things better for everyone who comes after you. That's not just success, that's legacy.